Well, hello, everyone. How are you today? Welcome to our AskAVC show. We have a great show lined up for you today with Venu Shamapant, who you can see on the screen right now. He's joining us from Austin, Texas at LiveOak Ventures. Welcome, Venu. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca.
Sure. Well, we're going to get started with just a little bit of background about Silicon Global and what we do. And then we're going to dive into our conversational chat with Venu. And then we're going to open up the floor or the platform to audience Q&A. So please warm up your questions. You can either ask them live on camera or you can ask them during the chat. And I will be monitoring the questions. So make sure that they're relevant. And we're going to be cluing you into what's relevant by giving you a little bit of background about Venu and what he's up to at LiveOak Ventures in Austin. But first, just a little bit about what I've been up to, 4 books, and the other, sometimes I say 4.5 books because I wrote a chapter for another book, and that chapter was on Asia, so it took up a good chunk of the book. So I say 4.5 books or 4 books all by myself. Okay. Now, many of you know about our Circle membership already, and several of you are members, which is why you are here on a complimentary basis. I'd also like to thank Invest Hong Kong for their series support for this program. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you. Lawrence Wong is on the show today or is in the chat today, and he'll be maybe asking a question or two later on. All right. We've been on to Texas in a big way over the past few months during our AskAVC series. So we've had 3 different Austin-based venture firms on. And you can check all those out on our YouTube channel, Silicon Global Online. They're all on there as replays. The reason that we've been focused on Austin is because it's been booming and it's been coming up as a VC hub. A lot of corporate venture, a lot of private venture, some Silicon coming in from Silicon Valley even. Just more and more traction, which we're going to be talking about with Venu in a minute. Okay, so that's a little bit about my preview. I would just ask that everyone keep the background noise muted. And if you want to ask a question, you can turn your camera on and ask away. Or you could just put your question in the chat box. Okay, so Venu, how are things today in Austin?
Things are like most days here in Texas on a summer day. It's a little over 100 degrees hot outside, so we're trying to stay inside and stay cool.
Okay. Austin is hot in many ways.
Yes, it certainly is. I mean, it continue. I've been in Austin for coming up on 25 years now, continuously, and I actually came to Austin.
I haven't yet, but I did that you texted me.
Oh, okay.
I did
Who's ever on the phone, please mute yourself. Okay. Hi. Yeah, so I know, Venu, you came to Austin. You've been in the venture business for 25 years. It's quite a lot of experience.
Yes, so I actually came to Austin originally to go to school here to UT Austin. So
Right.
Hook'em Horns. Got my degree there. Then I left. I spent a few years in Silicon Valley, spent a few years up in Portland, Oregon, before going to business school. And then I made my way back to Texas again. And so I've been back here now for a little over 25 years. Most of it in early stage investing in Texas-based technology companies. So, this is the only thing I've done for the last 25 years now.
I doubt it's the only thing you've done in the last 25 years, but we'll let you get by with that for right here. But let me, I'd prepared a few slides about your background too. You actually just summed it up pretty nicely there. But just so that everybody can digest it, founding partner of LiveOak Ventures in 2011. Venu grew up in India. He moved to the US for advanced degrees, electrical engineering degree from UT Austin. And he loves Austin. One of the great quotes I love about Venu is, venture is not a neighborhood sport. you know, or it is a neighborhood
It
sport.
is a neighborhood sport.
It is a neighborhood sport. Yes,
Yes.
it is a neighborhood sport. Because it's all localized, or regionalized. And that's why LiveOak is very focused on Texas and is all in on Texas, as they like to say. A little bit about Venu. He didn't brag too much, but these are all some of his companies that he's been involved with that have been acquired by big names like Cisco and Alcatel and Logitech and Qualcomm. He's also been involved with a company that went public on the NYSE. Hey, and guess what? He started his career at McKinsey. That's always a great place to start. And, you know, a lot of people move on from there and go on to do really big things, like Venu has with LiveOak Ventures. And I think the count is well over 60 investments by now.
Yep.
You know, is it 100 by now, Venu, or is around 60, 80?
It's a little over 60, including all the seed investments we make. But
Okay.
we think of them as core investments, which are anything that has moved beyond a seed stage company.
Okay.
And that list is a little over 60 right now.
Okay. Okay. And 20 plus exits. Amazing. A lot of acquisitions.
Yeah, I mean, that's true for the venture industry in general, right? I mean, if you look at overall from a number, from a transaction count as opposed to dollar value, you know, 90+% of exits tend to be acquisitions. Of course, if you look at it on a dollar basis, you will probably see that IPOs are a significantly higher percentage just because they raise a lot more capital. They're
Mhm.
bigger by nature.
Yeah.
But that's actually pretty reflective of what you would see for venture-backed companies in general.
Okay. The firm has raised 3 funds now, and seems that they're getting each time a little bit bigger. In fact, almost doubled in size for the last one, the most recent one. We could
Yep.
talk a little bit about fund size. And
Yeah, I mean, yeah, happy to do it now, or if you want to finish, then we can do it
Okay.
afterwards.
Okay, yeah, that's one of the points that I think would be good to raise with this audience. And just so you know, our audience today, we have people from Texas, of course, New York, Silicon Valley, Hong Kong, other places in the US. Does tend to be a US centric audience today, although we do have some people from overseas, particularly Hong Kong. I'm going to be going to Hong Kong soon for the Cybertech Ventures Summit Forum, which I've participated in many years. So I'm going to be moderating a global venture panel there, and I'm helping to program that as well. So I'm looking forward to going back to Hong Kong again. I missed it during COVID, but I went again last year, and this year I'm going again. But anyhow, let me carry on here. Some of the sectors that LiveOak has been really focused on is a lot of B2B, you know, SaaS and tech-enabled services. We'll go into that with Venu. Some of his really trophy deals that he's been working on, Osana and Take Command Health. Look, I'm going to open it up again and talk with Venu here. And yeah, so look, you know, one of the reasons we have been focused on Austin is because of this idea that Silicon Valley is definitely spreading across the United States, and it's spreading globally. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about how Austin fits in. Has it reached its peak yet? Or surpassed its peak, some might say?
Well, I think the you know, Texas is a long-term story that's finally kind of starting to get all its pieces together as we speak right now. As I said, I've been, you know, in venture capital in early stage investing in Texas for almost 25 years now. But the firms that I started my career in was one of the most active firms here in Austin called Austin Ventures, you know, for 20 years before I had joined. So
Yeah.
I've got a perspective that spans the last 45 years of kind of how things have developed in this market. And really the story of venture in Texas kind of starts in the mid to late 90s with a company here called Tivoli Systems that was the first big successful venture-backed software company, which then creates offshoots from it that have continued to come up behind, Tivoli Systems. It's people that were there that then started another company that becomes successful, and then the people from that kind of come out and started. So if you think about that as a reinforcing cycle, Silicon Valley obviously is the largest and the best example of something that has built that feedback system for a long, long, long time, very successfully. And Texas is building that in its place. And if you think about what it takes to build that kind of an ecosystem, it's a few things. Firstly, it's talent. Texas is the second largest employer of tech talent in the country after California. It's about 3/4 the size of tech employment in California is here in the Texas market. Secondly, it's the right kind of talent, meaning a lot of STEM-oriented talent. And so if you look at schools like the University of Texas system, the Texas A&M, Rise, SMU, all these schools out here, whether it's invention disclosures, whether it's R&D budgets, some of these schools, like the UT system alone, is in the top 3 or 4 in the country on those kinds of things. So it has a lot of talent. It has a lot of talent that is appropriate to help a early stage ecosystem develop. And then the third thing that it needs is early stage capital. And historically, that has been one of the areas that has been the hardest to kind of fill. I mean, if you go back 20 years ago, as I mentioned, AskAVC Ventures was by far one of the leading firms here that invested here. Now there are 3 or 4 or 5 firms that invest locally. But all of us still, when you combine all of the capital that is invested in it, it's probably less than 1% of the capital that's on the coast that is in Texas. And so there is still capital formation that is accelerating. It is significantly higher than I have seen in the last 25 years today in terms of interest in wanting to be in Texas and wanting to support companies and firms in Texas. But it's still very much a very small number relative to what you might see on the coast today. So the story is coming together. We're seeing more exits, more startups coming out there, more billion-dollar outcomes, more IPOs. And it's all of this is a reinforcing feedback cycle. And we're accelerating at this point, perhaps faster than I've seen in the last 25 years.
And you're starting to get some Silicon Valley folks coming into the market as well. So how is that impacting your own venture investing?
Yeah, I mean, that is not a new phenomenon. I mean, when I was at AskAVC Ventures, this was in the early 2000s. My first deal was with Sequoia Capital, coming into a deal here with us in Texas. So, when you have great entrepreneurs, firms will go where they are. So, you have great entrepreneurs in Texas, and so Valley VCs will come here to go do the deals. Typically, I kind of think of it as on a slightly different dimension. If you think about growth stage capital, where you're investing in a company that has gotten to a certain point in its growth stage, you write bigger checks, and you're writing checks behind well-established teams, and you're writing checks into companies that have already got product market fit and are accelerating. It's a lot easier for money to kind of go to those companies and seek them out wherever those companies exist. So Texas has always imported most of its growth capital historically, and that continues to be the case even now. 90+% of the capital at the growth stage is not local. It comes from outside of Texas into this market. What is unique is if you look at the traditional early stage capital, so company formation stage, that is when you are typically writing smaller checks. It could be anywhere from a couple of $100,000 to a few $1 million. You're typically writing it without existing proof points of success yet. It's usually backing a hypothesis behind somebody that has experienced a pain firsthand that wants to come build a solution for it, and it's very early. It is a much tougher deal for someone who's sitting on the coast to say, well, I'm going to write $1 million check into a company in Texas, and that's 3,000 miles away. When I don't know this entrepreneur, I don't run into this entrepreneur at happy hours or at events around town. So there's no personal relationship. It's a small check and it's far away. So it's a lot more work for people to do those deals. And that's where the local ecosystem really fits in well. And that's been our biggest positioning is we're that firm that will back that entrepreneur because we're here. We're meeting these people before they're starting companies, and we can write the $1 million check. We can work with you to get you to the point of where it's a company and a deal that you can then go raise growth capital from the coast. So in some ways, there is a lot more activity now, but at the earliest stages, it's still very much a local. That's why I called it's a neighborhood sport.
Right.
Early stage is very much a neighborhood sport, and even if you ask a traditional Valley VC or a New York-based VC, if you look at their portfolio, you'll see a significant percentage of their portfolio is within, as they used to call it, the 100-mile radius,
Right.
which was a driving radius. And the reason for it is that's where you know people, and that's where you can work with people.
Right.
And that's no different for us here in Texas as well.
Right. So looking back, what was that one deal that you mentioned that was your first deal and Sequoia was involved with it? What was that?
It was actually a company called Spatial Wireless. And to give you an example, this is kind of the kinds of things that are different about Texas versus in the Valley. You on average tend to be a lot more likely to back a first-time entrepreneur. So this was an entrepreneur we had met who was in the telecom industry and was working at that time for Alcatel as a director of engineering, comes to us with a pretty audacious pitch that says, Lucent and Nortel are these two companies that have been around for 100 years and have a monopoly on telephony infrastructure. And he was like, well, I think I can disrupt that all, and I can build software that will run on general purpose servers without building custom hardware to go build the next generation of wireless networking. We seated him. We actually had him come sit in our office because he was a first-time entrepreneur. He didn't really know everything. He knew a lot about telephony, but he didn't know a lot about company building or how to get started on it. We actually introduced him to his co-founder, who was actually an EIR at that time working with us, put the two of them together, seed funded them. They stayed in our offices for almost a year while they built the business plan for it to go validate it. And then we led their Series A. And that's the one that, Sequoia Capital came in and joined us in the syndicate to build that company. 4 years later, they had built a product, they had sold it to several wireless carriers, and then Alcatel-Lucent came and bought the company for $300 million. So that's an example of first-time entrepreneur. Now, the interesting story about him, and this kind of relates back to your question about the Valley, is that same entrepreneur we have backed now 3 times over the last 15 years. So he started Spatial Wireless, he sold it to Alcatel. 2 years later, he came back and started a company called Mavenir Systems. That's a company that went public on the NYSE, sold it to Mitel. And then 2 years later, we funded him in another deal. And eventually, he brought that, he merged that company with back with the assets of Mavenir Systems, and he runs that company now. It's a 1,000-people company. So it's kind of the data points of like you work with entrepreneurs who are first-time entrepreneurs, but once they succeed, they keep doing it. And that's what builds an ecosystem locally. And we're really happy to kind of have been in this business long enough. We have those people that come back to us all the time.
Oh, wonderful. That's a great story. But for those who are not fortunate enough to be within that circle, how do they get your attention? How do they come to you? How do you decide on who to back? Who do you decide on, who to come back, listen to again? Tell us about the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first question obviously is how do you get in front of us, get to us with your idea and what you're working on. The conventional wisdom has always been, find somebody, network your way to somebody that knows, one of the investment professionals at a firm, get a warm introduction, because we see so many deals. It's always helpful to get a warm introduction. I won't disagree with that. And in today's world, just getting on LinkedIn and looking my name up, you'll probably find 5 people that are, in common that might know me or someone at my firm. That's the easiest first way to kind of get to us. But there are certain things that are different, as I mentioned earlier, about being in a developing ecosystem like Texas. There are a lot of first-time entrepreneurs. They may not have the experience of going out and doing that. So we actually are much, much more of an open book than that. On our website, people can go in and say, here's my name, here's my LinkedIn profile, and I'm working on this kind of an idea, and I'd like to talk to somebody. And we see all of those. We respond to every one of the inquiries that come in. And in the interesting story category, one of the most successful investments we've had at LiveOak Venture Partners was a company called CS Disco, which is a legal e-discovery software company. And the founder of this company was a Filipino-American entrepreneur who was the youngest ever graduate at Harvard Law School at the age of 19, who had figured out that the system for how people did e-discovery was really broken. He hired a couple of developers, went out and built a little piece of software to use in his own practice, and then realized he had something interesting. And so we got a cold email over the transom from him saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. I think there's a software company to be built on it. And my partner and co-founder at LiveOak looked at that email, reached out to him, met him, and we ended up leading his first round of financing. And 8 years later, the company is public on the NASDAQ. So I would not tell you that's common, of course, but I would also tell you it's like not uncommon for us to find interesting people / ideas that come over the transom for us, at least for us. So that's probably what I would tell you on how to reach out to us. Then in terms of the process after that, when we started LiveOak, we wanted to take a completely new look at how we did that. And so we actually wrote a document that we call the Entrepreneur's Bill of Rights on how we do the process and what an entrepreneur can expect for us. And we went out and proudly posted it on our website because it's a credo we live by on our daily basis. And there's a few pieces that are important to it. So, which is once we meet you, if it's important enough for you to spend your life on it, we think it's more than important enough for us to take, at least a 90-minute meeting to understand what you're doing and be there, be in the moment, not on our phones, not on our computers while you're pitching your company. Listen to it, pay attention. We believe in quick no if it's not a fit. Making an entrepreneur hang around the hoop, thinking that there might be an opportunity is actually the worst thing we can do as a VC. But we're also, there's a requirement for us to be constructive in passing on a deal. We never move a deal in our CRM to pass without putting it in an interim stage where the partner has to provide feedback to an entrepreneur that has come and met us on what could help move the ball along or make any introductions, et cetera. And then the ones we are likely to move forward are what then it's a smaller group of it that this gets into the deeper due diligence process. On average, never more than 30 to 45 days to make up our decision at the latest on that.
You really are being a good neighbor.
Well, we try to be. I think it's important. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people in my early days in my career in the venture business, I would think of this as a transactional business. It's like a finance business. It's a transactional business. The longer I've been in the business, I've learned it's not a transactional business. It's a relationship-driven business. It's not a finance business. It's a people business. Great entrepreneurs take mediocre ideas and can make them successful, and bad management teams can destroy wonderful ideas. And so, in our business, everything pays itself over time. And so we have examples of people we passed on deals and then they come back and start new companies, but they still come to us. You mentioned one of my deals, Osano, that I was that I'm working with right now.
Mhm.
Here was an entrepreneur that had actually come to me with his previous company, and I passed on his deal. But I did obviously something right in the way we did that. That when he started his next company, he still came back and said, "I want to run it by you guys first." And this time we led his financing. We were the first investor, and I'm, the founding board member on that company. So it's a business that, is a long-term relationship, people-driven business, and the sooner we start treating it that way, the more likely we are to succeed as well.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. One of the things I'm interested in is, since Texas is so big and you got all these gigantic cities that are growing so fast, then tell us about the technology strengths of each one of them: Dallas, Austin, Houston, et cetera, San Antonio. Is the technology a lot different in each one of these cities? And related to that, what are the sectors that you primarily invest in? I know it's tech and tech-enabled services, but if you give us some more color around that, that would be helpful.
Yeah. So for us, let's starting with the last part of that question, and then I'll address it,
Okay.
how it maps to the three cities, so to speak.
Okay.
But we are broadly segment agnostic. And the reason we're segment agnostic is our investment philosophy is very much people first. And we are geographically focused on the state of Texas. So when you talked about the 60 plus investments we've made so far, 100% of all the companies are based or headquartered in Texas, CEOs in Texas, and typically some or all of the founders are based here in Texas. So when we focus on geography and we want to be the ones that back the best entrepreneurs here, we don't want to then kind of say, well, within that, we only invest in this sector or that sector. We've gone into sectors we had no experience with, where we backed great entrepreneurs, and they have taught us more about those sectors than we could ever learn by ourselves. So for that reason, we tend to be fairly segment agnostic from our perspective. When you talk about the Texas and the different markets and how it is different, it's really a tale of three cities. It's Austin, Dallas, and Houston that really kind of are the bulk of the venture market. If you went back for the last 25 years, it's almost always been Austin somewhere between 60 to 75% of the market, depending on the year in terms of venture capital raised, followed by Dallas, which is probably in the 15 to 20%, followed by Houston, which is in the 5 to 10, 15% range, depending on the year. Austin probably is the closest in kind of its culture, perspective, et cetera, to Silicon Valley. Very entrepreneurial, significant velocity of deal activity here. People who have done it before, the repeat entrepreneurs coming and doing it, et cetera, et cetera. Dallas is probably the second one, but tends to typically have more often, entrepreneurs that are coming out of larger industries and starting startups for the first time. So the example I gave you of the founder in telecom, that was a Dallas-based founder. So telecom industry was a big industry in Dallas. So at one stage, there was a lot of people coming out of the telecom industry and starting to build software companies for that. Houston is also similar in that profile, but the industry tends to be slightly different. Houston obviously has a lot more energy, and increasingly we're starting to see more healthcare-oriented stuff, given all the big health centers that are in Houston, with the medical center and everything else there. We're starting to see more healthcare and energy-oriented stuff in Houston. So that's the three big cities. The one other kind of honorable mention I would say is San Antonio. San Antonio has a large Air Force presence, and so in particular, a lot of cybersecurity presence in San Antonio. So we see a lot of companies that come in from that background and from San Antonio, and given the proximity to Austin, usually tend to have companies that have like an Austin, San Antonio presence in that space. So that's the four markets that really define the bulk of the Texas market.
Well, that sounds like plenty to keep you very occupied, but I'm curious to know if you would ever invest outside of Texas, and particularly would you invest overseas, say in Asia? since, I mean, you're from India, so you must be very familiar with the Indian market as well. So how about it?
You know, I am, but I think it's highly unlikely that we as a firm will go outside of Texas anytime soon. You know, at the end of the day, as kind of the founder of the firm, for me and my co-founder, in a venture capital firm, kind of three things have to align for a firm to build a franchise. Those three things typically come in the form of, you know, there's a strategy that matters, there's a fund size that is appropriate for that strategy, and then there's a team with a background that can support that strategy. So if you miss any one of them, if you raise too big a fund for your strategy or that your team can support,
Yeah,
doesn't work. If you have strategy creep relative to your team's ability, doesn't work.
yeah.
And so for us, maintaining that balance between those three things has been a big driver of how we think about strategy.
Okay.
Where we know people now is in the state of Texas. We take a lot of pride in covering the state exhaustively. You know, we want to know every great entrepreneur in this market. And if we can do that with a fund that's our size, we can continue to put, you know, funds out there that can deliver top quartile returns.
Uh-huh.
And so that's working for us. And I think we're going to stay focused on that for a while.
Okay. What about the Mexico connection, considering the proximity of Mexico? And we're hearing a lot about the reshoring story of China companies moving into Mexico and Monterrey in particular to get into the Texas market and the US market. Is that something you're paying attention to?
Well, I mean, it's obviously something we read about a lot, we hear about a lot, but I think again, it goes back to the ones that you were talking about that are doing that typically are manufacturing oriented companies that are trying to do that. And we don't invest in heavy asset based kind of businesses. And so those are directly less relevant for what we are doing as a firm.
I see.
But the other dimension to it that does play into it is even if you look at software companies that are you know, maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago would have gone to an India or, you know, Ukraine or whatever to start offshore locations, are increasingly starting to look for nearshore options to go do that. And we see a lot more companies that are doing their development centers in Mexico and Colombia and Brazil, Argentina, you know, those kinds of places, similar time zones, you know, and that proximity kind of makes a big difference. So I would definitely say we have seen a significant amount of activity in that sense from our portfolio companies, where they're using nearshoring for software development, software testing, et cetera, now compared to like 10 years ago.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised. Look, let's see if there are any questions out there in our audience, our online audience. I did see a question earlier from Jeff Fryer who had his hand up. Jeff, do you want to ask a question? You can unmute yourself.
Yes. Hi. Thank you. And nice to meet you, Venu. So I'm a fellow Austinite. So given your track record investments, including recently with Amplify AI, Commerce Now, and others, I'm curious how the recent cooling of Gen AI hype is influencing your investment thesis. How are you distinguishing between true AI innovation, something you want to invest in, and kind of AI washing when you're evaluating a potential investment?
I'm going to have to steal that word, AI washing. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff, for the question. I think, look, you know, this is kind of, when you've been in the industry long enough, you kind of have seen a few of these waves which get ahead of themselves, but eventually people do catch up on it. We continue to, as a firm, think there is significant leverage that AI can bring to a lot of different industries, but perhaps driven by fund size and the kind of talent pool available here, we view the investment strategy slightly differently in the sense that there's horizontal AI technologies. You know, whether you're investing in a new next generation LLM, you know, open AI, those kinds of things, in a large way, those are probably kind of out of bounds for us for reasons of capital requirements. I mean, you know, we're a smaller fund. We're not going to write $100 million check into something. And so by definition, some of those kind of become harder for us to get into and get access to and work on them. Where we do see a lot of them, and the two examples that you took, and even actually Disco is the third one I would tell you, are great examples of companies that have brought AI to work on specific vertical industry problems that are unique, that can be addressed in a way that are not as easily addressable without the use of AI. So whether it is Disco that has introduced their AI version of eDiscovery product that is in the market, they're a leader on that, or it's Amplify, which is taking those techniques and applying it to contact center people management business, or it is Converse now that's taking it to voice-based order processing for quick service restaurants. These are more very unique vertical problems that are unique to an industry, number one. And number two is it's not just you can't just say, well, I'm just going to take your voice sample and put it into OpenAI and I'm done. What Converse now does is part of it is OpenAI, but part of it is the entire orchestration of, a workflow process that is where you can go into an industry and say, I'm not going to disrupt the way you work. If you go to a McDonald's and tell them, here's OpenAI, you can put everything through this, have a, good luck with that. No one's going to use that. But if you go the way Converse now does, which is go to Domino's and say, give me your menu, I will have my LLM tuned to where it can take that order, and it's all fully integrated where if I'm not able to get above a certain level of conversion on it, I can flip it to a contact center and make sure your order is not lost. But everything that converts, I can put it into the POS and I can apply your region by region discounts to it. That's a hard problem. And it's not just an AI problem. It is a vertical industry problem where a piece of it is done very effectively through AI. We love plays like that. If you have, companies that are adding very real value to a particular industry, but have figured out how to do it across an entire work stream, that's where defensibility comes in. Because once you're in that and you're going in and saying, nothing's changing and I'm still providing value to it, why is that customer going to just displace you with somebody else who's going to come in with a better AI model when they have to still work everything else around it? So that's how we think about it. We still think there's a ton of value in those kinds of plays, and we continue to be very active in looking at those kinds of things.
Great answer. Thanks, Venu. Thanks, Rebecca.
Absolutely.
Sure. Anyone else? I see a few things here in the chat. Okay. Anyone else with a question? Okay. Please share with us any other main players in the startup support ecosystem in Austin. Thanks, Lawrence, for the question. So over to you, Venu. Please share with us any companies, any other main players in the startup support ecosystem in Austin.
Well, I think obviously, I mean, when you think about a startup ecosystem, you kind of think about the groups of players that are actively involved here. Start with the early stage venture firms. You've already talked. Rebecca has already kind of hosted several of my, colleagues from Austin that are in early stage investing. I think she saved the old guy for the last.
No.
But
so the best for the last.
There's clearly firms like Silverton, firms like S3 Ventures, us, we're all active. Those players pretty well. Beyond that, University of Texas and the Texas A&M from an ecosystem standpoint, very active players here. That would be good to know. A lot of the lawyers and the legal ecosystem is very similar to the ones that are in the Valley. When I started in this business 25 years ago, there were probably two, Valley-based law firms that had an office here. Now, pretty much every one of them has an office here. And they all have startup attorneys here. They're all working on interesting, entrepreneurial things right now. So that ecosystem is actually very easily transportable in from, if you got a relationship with them in the Valley, they know all the people here. They have offices here. So that's a pretty common, kind of theme that you can get into here. But the incubation ecosystem has kind of been, in fits and starts. Techstars used to be there. They've I think the Austin chapter is not active anymore, but there's a few others that have started out here. But a lot of the players that you hear about everywhere, they're starting to kind of open their Austin offices now. Some of the growth stage VCs have moved here. Sapphire's kind of headquartered here. 8 VCs based out here. And by the way, the other interesting thing is very important venture people, kind of stalwarts, have moved into Austin. Jim Breyer is a friend of the firm, has done 6 or 7 co-investments with us from Breyer Capital. Jim Breyer was the managing partner at Excel, board of Facebook. He's in Austin. Bill Gurley from Benchmark has moved to Austin recently. Tench Cox from Sutter Hill is here in Austin now. So there is people with that kind of level of experience and expertise in venture investing that have also now moved to Austin. So that whole ecosystem is starting to come together as we speak.
Yeah, I also would add the South by Southwest Festival, which I've
Of course.
attended 2 times and spoke at 2 times. Actually, I did a tech chat there with Jim Breyer at South by Southwest in 2023. And then I went back again this past year, and we held a wonderful barbecue on Sunday afternoon in the Austin Hills. And I'm hoping we're going to do that again this next year when South by Southwest comes in. But that certainly helped to put Austin on the map, on the tech map.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing happening in other cities that want to copy that strategy, like Milwaukee, for instance. They have a big program called Summerfest Tech, and I spoke there recently, and so they're copying this model that has been really successful for Austin. But look, I know, yeah, definitely these deal makers have entered the Austin market, like you mentioned, the law firms. It was remarkable to me to find so many of the firms that I knew from Silicon Valley or New York or elsewhere in Austin. And
Exactly.
yeah,
I mean, literally 25 years ago, it was like Wilson Sonsini and Broback.
yeah,
And then there were a bunch of the local kind of Vincent Elkins and those kind of. Now it's like just the who's who's here: Cooley, Perkins, Mofo, Wilson.
yeah.
Every one of them has opened an office here. Of course, DLA Piper, all of them.
Oh, sure.
And so they're bringing with them a lot of activity, and they're bringing with them a lot of expertise in
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, look, tell us about a little bit more about yourself as a venture capitalist. How what makes you a good venture capitalist?
That's a very loaded question because it presumes I'm a good venture capitalist, but
No, all you have to do is look at your track record.
I think there's in all honesty, this has been a thing that has evolved for me over the last 20 plus years of doing this. If you'd asked the Venu from the early 2000s, I probably would have said, hey, you just have to be the smartest guy in the room. You got to know more about things than anybody else, and that's what makes you successful. I think increasingly I would tell you we're enablers, we're not the doers, and the sooner we recognize that as a venture capitalist, the more effective you are. We can only enable entrepreneurs in helping them detect something or work on something, but we're not the ones that know how to do it better. If I did, I would have done it myself. So I think having a little bit of humility that in that goes a long way. Having you can be tough but fair, and entrepreneurs respect that. They're not expecting to have their best friends on their board, but they're also not expecting somebody they don't want to have a beer with on their board either. So, striking that balance between being able to provide a devil's advocate perspective to an entrepreneur, but at least also being very open-minded to being proven wrong, probably is the hardest, balancing act that I continue to still learn. And I'd be lying to you if I told you I know exactly how to do it in every situation.
Well, and technology continues to change so rapidly.
Absolutely.
So that's another one of the challenges of the business, not only the cycles, but the in terms of geography, timing, and sector as well. So there's another similar question in the chat box, but it regards blockchain and Web3. Okay, Web3 has kind of been overtaken by Gen AI recently, but how are you still seeing people who are, working on Web3 blockchain with AI, and that's kind of the merger of the two, Web3 blockchain with AI? Are you seeing that? And people working on that in interesting ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has definitely, slowed down in the context of like there's just the hype around it has definitely slowed down. But I think there's a lot of fundamental activity that's still going on here. There's no question about that. From my perspective, we've never been quite as interested in kind of what I would call the currency replacement aspects of it. I think Bitcoin as a technology, is interesting, but what blockchain is more important to me than a particular version of it, and how you use blockchain to enable certain things that are required for an enterprise solution is more important. You may not call it Web3, it might not sound sexy, but there's a lot of companies that are trying to do those kinds of things. And we continue to look at that. I would also tell you it's a tough space for people to fully grapple with and understand the nuances of how to do it. And there are people that are much better experts at it than I am, for sure, or my firm is in that sense. We understand that from a context of an enterprise application, but from a core blockchain kind of interface technology standpoint or foundational technology standpoint, there are definitely other firms that we collaborate with. All for example, Kyle Samani here, in town, is Multicoin Capital, is one of the people that I have spent a lot of time talking to, and I think is very highly of that team, for example. So we do see it, but it's probably not quite as active as it used to be.
Okay, another question here. This is from Daniel Newland in the chat box. He wants to know about when is the right time to go on a roadshow? When should an entrepreneur seek out VC money? And this is a very loaded question. What do you look for in terms of maturity of product, size, revenue,
it's a great
etc.?
question. It's a great question. And I think it's a question that a lot of entrepreneurs don't give as much thought to before they come out. Look, fundraising from VCs is not an end all. It's not the prize. It's a means to an end. And the question is, what's the end? You're trying to build an interesting company.
Mm-hmm.
The way I think about it is raise money when it's going to help you make a step function improvement in eliminating the risk in your business. So then the question becomes, what is the risk you're eliminating? And that's very much dependent on at what stage of the company you are at. So if you're coming out there and you just got an idea and you are trying to raise money, well, the question is, what are you raising it for? It's validated that idea is a valid idea. It's a real pain point. People will buy the tech, the solution if you come, and build it. That's why people raise seed money. It's a smaller amount of capital. Go validate the pain point, go build an MVP, show that someone will use it if you build it. Yes, that's helpful at that time. Similarly, and those typically tend to be smaller amounts of capital depending on the project you're working on, unless it's a very deeply technical thing that needs a lot of resources. You can accomplish that in today's world in hundreds of thousands, not in millions. The next phase then goes into, okay, I've got that. How do I then take it to where I can prove that it works beyond my best friends? Like I've sold my 3 best friends, but how do I go sell the 10 other people that are not my best friends who still value it, pay something for it? Then if capital is going to enable your ability to go prove that, that's one reason to go raise money. The second reason to go raise money at that time is that there are points at which it helps to have people who have had some visibility and experience and pattern matching with how things work. And that's typically what I think of myself as potentially bringing to the table. I'm not going to be an expert in, generative AI compared to my founders. They will always know more about that than I will. But what I know is I've been on boards for 25 years at startup companies. I know when to push the pedal on investing in go-to-market and when not to, when to try and sell a company, all of those kinds of things, right? Those are more valuable questions. And at some point, being a founder is a very lonely job. It's a very hard job. And if you think there is a partner that can be helpful to you, who can bring capital and be a thought partner on some of those decisions, that's a good time to go raise money. So those are some of the things that I would think about. But by no means will I ever tell you that venture capital is the only way to go build a company. It is absolutely not. Plenty of great companies that have been bootstrapped in the past. But if you can, and then the third piece that I would say, in addition to the two I just told you, is competitive intensity. If you're in a market that's slower moving and therefore gives you the time to bootstrap and take the results from the investment and reinvest in it, that works. If you're in an environment where competition's moving 10 times faster than you are, and you want to bootstrap it, you're going to be left behind. And that's when you go raise money, because you want to get the same level of kind of investment made that you can keep up with the competition. So those are some of the different things that I would tell you to think about.
That's a very good answer. Now, there's a question about the federal government spending in venture and the history of that. Well, right now, we're seeing some federal government spending in tech, investing and tech innovation throughout the heartland. But there's been a history of that with the SBIC through the Small Business Administration. So can you tell us a little bit about what that process has been like? Has it worked?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, we used a very small program called the Early Stage SBIC when we raised our first fund. We have not used it for Fund 2 and Fund 3. In the kind of small world category, some of the best known venture capital firms have historically been SBICs. Austin Ventures was an SBIC in its first fund. Kleiner was an SBIC, from what I read about. Several well-known firms got their starts with that source of capital. Like with anything with a government, this thing, it has its benefits, it has its negatives, and you just have to balance out how that can work for you. For us, it worked very well. It gave us that scale in our first fund to go from what would have been like a $60-70 million fund to a $100 million fund. Let us build a little bit more portfolio diversity, let us support bigger checks to our portfolio companies, et cetera. And, so yes, it had some paperwork and compliance requirements that come with taking government money, but when we balanced the rewards to the risks, it was absolutely worth it. And that's why we did it the first time. But by the time we came to our second and third fund, the program had gone away and we had enough of a track record that we were able to attract traditional LP capital. And so we did not do it the second time. But it served its purpose. It enabled us to raise that first fund, put points on the board, and be able to go raise private capital after that. So I would not shut it off as something that you should not consider at all by any means. I would be very open to, I would encourage people to look at it as an option that lets you achieve what you need to achieve on your first fund and set you on a path where you may not need it after that.
Right, and there are also lots of grants for entrepreneurial companies. We're not just talking about venture capital firms, but the actual startups too. Absolutely.
SBIRs, and they are a great source of capital. A lot of portfolio companies have used it historically. In terms of like supporting their R&D activity. A lot of also R&D credits have been very common. There are some state-specific ones. There are some, development, incentives outside of that. Those are all obviously incredibly helpful to startups.
So what do you think about all the spending that's going into the chip sector? Austin has been a beneficiary of that with semiconductors. You think you think we're going to be able to reverse the tide in the United States and bring more semiconductor production back to the US?
I think so. I think it's going to take a little bit more time. The issue with that has always been it is an incredibly capital intensive industry.
Yeah.
And when you take a very, very, very capital intensive industry for private capital, the hardest part with that is getting started. It's like if I told you to go build a new airline manufacturing company, it's incredibly hard for you to get that company off the ground. But once you get it off the ground at a level, it can sustain itself. And so, like any capital-intensive industry, it does need that for its ability to compete internationally. It
Right.
does need that initial support, and I think it can absolutely come back. There's no question about that.
Okay, good.
And it needs that investment right now for it to come back.
Sure. And what about with the presidential elections today, with a lot of focus on the heartland? And I consider Texas to be part of the heartland. It's not on the coast. So do you think that we're going to see more energy for the heartland now, which has been kind of an overlooked market for many years compared to the coast, because we're still seeing New York, Silicon Valley as the dominant markets, and Boston. What about that? Do you think people like J.D. Vance and our new VP candidate is going to be a help?
Well, I don't want to get into the politics of it because that's not going to be a productive conversation. I don't think. I think it does go without saying that there is a significant amount of talent outside of the coast that probably, hasn't been leveraged to the level it can be productively leveraged right now. So there's no question in my mind that focusing on that talent and bringing better efficiencies to its applicability to the next generation of technology is going to be meaningfully, important. I would also tell you the flip side is you can't mandate that, you can't government, direct that to work. At the end of the day, private industry has to go figure out how to make that very effective. And it's a process. It's a flywheel that has to start in every one of these regions. And it almost always starts with a sector, a university, a program, something that gives that spark that then gets it going and becomes self-sustaining. The ones that are purely just sustained by some artificial infusion might see a bright movement for a moment or two, but are hard to sustain. Texas is a great example of one. Like, it took us 20 years, but, we're here and it's happening now. And other markets in the Midwest have also started. I mean, Michigan, for example, and around Ann Arbor, you mentioned Milwaukee and Wisconsin. There's definitely a ton more startup activity in those markets now. Colorado, Denver has been much more active now than it has been in the last 15, 20 years. So I think people are discovering these things, and private capital is flowing there because it's recognizing it and saying, in today's world where people are geographically distributed, it takes a lot less capital to go start a company because of all these technology resources that are available. Why is somebody in any one of these markets at a disadvantage other than the fact that you need an idea and you need to be able to recruit the team to go after it? And I think that's a natural process that'll work itself through. People can help accelerate it, catalyze it, but you can't sustain it unless it becomes a reinforcing feedback cycle. And several of these markets are on their way to becoming that.
Yeah, no, it helps if you're a state capital like Austin is, if you have a very good university base, which Austin has, and you've got all this tech talent moving in. So
exactly.
It's a great story there. So let's give Venu a round of applause for joining us today, and really appreciate you joining us, Venu. And look, everyone, thank you for all your questions. Are there any last questions? If not, I'm going to sign off. Robin Wan has one last minute question. Okay. Robin? Oh, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Hector's saying thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. So,
well, thank you for having me.
We'll be back again in September with another show. We actually have more than 60 of our shows already posted on Silicon Global Online on our YouTube channel. You'll see them all there. And please check in.
And I was if I could say one last thing, I was going to say,
Sure.
If anybody wants to reach out, my contact information is all on our website. absolutely feel free to drop us a note, and would love to chat more.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Venu. Really a
All
great,
right.
thank you again. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.